How's it going? Today I'm going to show you an intermediate style objective. The objective today is going to be a spy type objective or an espionage type objective. The idea is that the player has to fly a really slow biplane. In our case, we have the U2. They have to land on the strip here and stop. And when they do, we're going to pretend, quote unquote, that the spy is let out of the back of the plane, and then the player takes off. And when they do, the spy has infiltrated the network, right? Super cool. Um, and it's more intermediate because it's not the typical destroy things, and when you destroy it, we give you credit kind of thing, right? This is a little bit more complex. So let's take a look at the inner workings of our group here. So the way we fire off the beginnings of this objective is through this check zone. So I don't want to go over the check zone logic too much, but the idea is that we have an inside check zone and an outside check zone. The inside check zone will fire when the player enters, and the outside check zone will fire when the player leaves the area. Um, so when the player enters, and that's going to be this middle circle here, when the player enters that middle circle, we pulse this gate, which in turn pulses the activate, and then that does an object pulse to our complex trigger. Now you might be asking like, well, why not just have the complex trigger on all the time? Well, a complex trigger is apparently very resource intensive, and you can't have too many in your missions, especially if you have a multiplayer mission. So instead, we're going to have the complex trigger only turn on when the player is inside the circle. Now remember, I have an out or outside for our check zone as well. So when the player leaves the circle, then we deactivate that complex trigger, and that's going to be this outer circle. So when the player leaves this outer circle, then we're going to deactivate the complex trigger. All right, let's go back to our enter. So check zone, player enters, we fire, pulse a gate, pulse activate, we turn on our complex trigger. Our complex trigger, obviously not enabled. We're checking for planes. We're checking for that U2 plane that I talked about, and our country is USSR. So now that we have this sort of like, yes, I found this plane, then we can do any of these event filters. So the first one I have here is our entered alive, and then after that we have object stationary and live. So let's talk about this entered alive one. So when the player enters the complex trigger, not necessarily the check zone, but the complex triggers influence area, that's going to be this very small one. And if I show you, you can see it's basically the size of our airfield. So when the player enters the size of the airfield, then I'm going to let the player know, hey, you entered that area. You're in the right place. You're doing the right thing. And it's always a good idea to give immediate feedback to the player as often as possible. Um, so we're pulsing our on entered event to this gate. The gate pulses three different things here. First, it pulses our deactivate. Then it pulses our entered area subtitle, and it pulses this 1 minute 30 seconds timer. So let's talk about the deactivate. So you can see here I have like an X, and that's because I'm sending a pulse to the deactivate, and the deactivate is sending a pulse back to the gate, immediately disabling this gate. So if a player enters the area again, um, this gate is disabled, meaning that nothing past the gate will fire. So um, we will get that message, but then it'll immediately deactivate, right? So we'll get the subtitle message, and we'll get this minute and a half timer fired. So the minute and a half timer fires, and then look, we pulse the gate to be activated again. So now the gate will be activated, allowing the player like every minute and a half to go through this sort of like fence of the complex trigger. Um, However, the player is inside the complex trigger. even if it's a minute and a half, it won't fire again, right? So that's really good. Now, we told the player, hey, you need to land. The player lands, right? And that's this object stationary and alive. So on the when the player lands, I have a switch that immediately goes to deactivate. And the switch here is set to 0 seconds, and this is very important because what happens is sometimes the player will like land and then sort of like stop and then like roll a little bit and then stop and then roll a little bit and stop because their engine's sort of like pushing them forward. And when that happens, this I'm sorry, the complex trigger will fire the stationary and alive event over and over and over every time the player rolls a little bit, stops, rolls a little bit, stops, right? Because they're stationary and they're alive, and then it moves. Oh, they're stationary and alive, and then they're moving again, and then they stop. Oh, they're stationary and alive. So as soon as it happens the first time, the event fires the first time, I am immediately disabling the complex trigger. No longer, so that means it no longer can fire any events. I am also disabling this gate right here. And the gate comes from the check zones pulse the gate, and then the gate pulses or activate. So if this is disabled, then this activate will never fire, and that's important because we do not want to activate the complex trigger anymore. After the switch fires, we're going to pulse a 2-second timer, and then we will let the player know, hey, you landed and the spy has infiltrated the network. Great job. Immediately after that, we will deactivate all of our icons that are tied to this mission. So we have these icons here. Remember, we want to give good feedback. So this is like, icons to say, hey, you need to go over here and you need to land your plane kind of thing. And so we're deactivating all those icons, and then we're enabling this last little single icon saying, hey, espionage successful, great job. Your spy has successfully infiltrated the enemy network. And then from there, we can keep adding more, right? So let's say we want to add another, maybe it's a little, like a single player mission, and you want to add in your mission objective type thing. So we can say, it's the primary task and you succeeded. It's for allies and it's undefined. And so now, uh, let's see, we got to name it correctly. So it'll be like espionage succeeded. And then we can say whatever here. You got a spy in the network. And yeah, so then that gives them credit, and then we can even do like a mission end after that if we want it to be single player. But this is basically the idea behind a like a more intermediate spy objective type mission. It's not the typical destroy things. The player has to do something different and unique, which is land, get in the area, land, and then like take off again in order to get this mission successful. So thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, let me know.